build this map between objects and the database. Okay? So there's a lot of things you can do once you have this map. We're going to focus on the creating entities, attributes, and relationships, and then setting their attributes, and then querying for them, and things like that. But there's a lot of other things you can do in core data. I'll mention some of them at the end, and you can go read up on it if you want to do more sophisticated database-y things. So how do we access all of this stuff in our code once we've created this map? And the answer is we need an NS managed object context. Okay, NS managed object context. This context is kind of the hook we need to go create objects in the database, set attributes of objects in the database, query for objects for the database. We all do these through this context. So how do we get a context? Well, there's really two ways to do it. One is you use this class UI managed object, or managed document rather, which I'm going to talk about. And the second way, which I'm not going to talk about, is that you can alloc init an NS managed object context. The reason I'm not going to talk about it is you got to know a little bit about contexts and how they work and how they do thread safety and things like that I don't really want to get into the details of, and that UI managed document takes care of it all for us. Okay, so that's why I'm going to focus on the UI managed document way. If you want to see how the way of alloc initting an NS managed object context, because there's more than that you need to do, like you got to specify where the file is, the persistent store for it, you got to get this map into the picture, all that stuff you'd have to do manually if you don't use UI managed document. If you go and create a new project and say master detail instead of single view controller, it'll actually have a button that says use core data, and when you create that new one, you'll see a whole bunch of core data code that does all this business in there. Okay, but there's no need for you to go look at that. UI managed document is a much simpler, cleaner way to get yourself a UI or an NS managed object context, which is what we're trying to do. So let's talk about UI managed document and how that works. It inherits from a class called UI document. UI document is a whole bunch of mechanism for managing some storage. Okay, UI managed document puts a core data database in some storage. So you're managing the storage of your core data database. So you can think of UI managed document as just like a thing that contains your core data database for you. And all you ever really do is open or save, open or create a UI managed document, and then grab its managed object context, and then use it to do your database. That's it. Okay? So that's what we're going to talk about, how to open or create a UI managed document and then get its managed object context. Then we'll dive back into, now that we have a context, how do we do core data? So here's how you create a UI managed document. You alloc init it. Its designated initializer is init with file URL. You have to give it the URL where this core data database is going to be stored. Okay? I put these 4 lines of code that are in white, that are before the yellow here. They describe how you would create a document called My Document in the user's Documents directory. Okay? So when we haven't really talked about storing files, right? We haven't accessed the file system at all in anything we've ever done. We do this with this class NS File Manager. I'm not really going to cover that this week. Suffice it to say, the file manager can give you the URL of the documents directory for the user. That's what the second line of code there is. And then you can just append whatever you want the name of your document to be, like My Document or Flickr database or whatever you would want to call it. This is going to be the URL where it's going to put that core data database for you. So now you have the URL. You just say alloc init to create a UI managed document. Okay? So this UI managed document, though, you've only alloc init it. You haven't actually created it on disk. It doesn't exist on disk yet. Okay? So we have some work to do to make this thing exist on disk. And how do we do that? Well, we have to create it if it doesn't exist, and we have to open it if it does exist. In other words, we've used it before. So to find out whether it exists on disk, we have to do this file manager thing. File exists at path. So you have the URL to it. You say NS File Manager default manager. That's like a shared file manager. File exists at path. It returns a Boolean whether the file already exists. If it does exist, in other words, if file exists, then we're going to open it. And the way we're going to open it is with the UI managed document method open with completion handler. If it doesn't exist, then we're going to create that document on disk with save to URL For save operation, UI document save for creating is the argument we want there because we're creating this file. Completion handler. Okay? What's that completion handler business all about? Okay, why do these open and save and create? This it says save to URL, but really it's create at URL. Why do they have this completion handler? Well, it's because these are asynchronous. These two methods, open and create, basically, are asynchronous. They don't happen immediately. When you ask the UI managed document, please open this or please create this for me, it might take it a little bit of time. Okay? Why might it take some time? Well, it's possible it could take some time because the file system takes a certain amount of time, but yeah, there's other things involved that we're not going to talk about, like iCloud, where maybe it needs to go check something with some network cache or something like that because this document is going to be on iCloud, okay, in other devices. Now, one great thing about UI managed document and using that to do your core data database is you're on the fast track to iCloud. Okay, iCloud much easier, more straightforward if you just start with UI managed document. But anyway, suffice it to say these two things, opening a document and creating a document, are asynchronous, which means that completion handler, got a little syntax error there, but that completion handler gets called back on the thread you called these methods on, which has got to be the main thread because this is UI managed document. This is a UIKit object. You have to call these methods on the main thread, the main queue. So that completion handler will get called back on the main queue when it's done. Okay, no matter how long it takes, it'll get called later when it's done. And then in that block, you just start doing what you want to do. All right, so let's talk about how this might look to see if the file exists, and if it does, open it, and if it doesn't, create it. It looks something like this. And inside that completion handler, if you successfully opened or successfully created it, you're going to call some method of yours. I've called it document is ready. You can call that method anything you want that says, okay, the document's ready to go. Now you can go use it. Right? And I'm doing the same thing in either case. It's a little bit of a bummer that there's no method like open or create, and it just does it all at once, that you have to do this file exists business, but you do. So you're going to have this little sequence of code in almost any app that uses a UI managed document. Okay, kind of silly because it's all very, very simple, similar if-then there, but that's what it looks like. Okay, so now what does that document is ready method look like? It looks something like this. One thing I might do at the beginning of my document is ready is check the state of the document to see if it's in the normal state. Normal state means this guy's ready to go. Okay, what other states could it be in? Well, it could be in the state closed. Closed means you haven't opened it yet or you haven't created it yet. In either case, it's going to be closed. You cannot use a document when it's in the closed state. Some of these other states, like there was a saving error or editing is temporarily disabled because someone else is editing this document in iCloud and it's updating, for example, you're not going to run into those in this class, but you should know that they're there. So checking that at the beginning to, it's a bit mask there. That's why I'm using that ampersand, right? I'm just checking that bit UI document state normal just to see if the document is ready to go. So that might be the first thing I do is check its state to make sure it's ready to go. If it's not, like if it was closed, then I might go back and try to open it or create it again. If it's got an error, I might wait a while and try this again or something like that. So anyway, let's say I have this document in a normal state. Now what am I going to do? Now I'm going to grab that NS managed object context and go start doing some core data stuff. That's it. Okay? So this is how we get started. Now, before we dive into what we're going to do with that NS managed object context, a couple more things about UI managed document. One is that it is auto-saved. Okay? You do not have to save it. And you can save it using this method you see here, but generally we don't. We let it auto-save. Okay? The way we save it is with the same method we used before, but we say UI document save for overwriting. But generally, we don't call this method. We let it auto-save. Okay, so that's an important thing to understand. Okay. Second thing, closing the document. Well, it kind of auto-closes as well. When does it close? When there are no more strong pointers to it. In other words, when there are no more strong pointers to it, when it's going to leave the heap, it gets closed automatically. So you generally don't call close either, but you can do that as well. And close, just like saving, are asynchronous, and you've got to implement these completion handlers to do whatever you want when they're done closing or done saving. Question?
So I assume that it auto-saves before closing. Like, it's never going to close it without saving.
Correct, yeah. So the question is, does it auto-save before closing? Absolutely. If you say close, or if you stop having a strong pointer to it, it will save and then close. Okay? One thing I will say about saving, the auto-saving, is when you're in debugging, when you're in development mode and you're debugging, sometimes students will get a little confused because they'll go and they'll do something, update their database, and then they'll stop in the debugger, make a code change, and run again, and the data won't be there. Well, because it didn't have a chance to auto-save. So when you're in development mode, you might want to throw in some explicit saves if you're going to be hitting stop in the debugger all the time. Okay? All right, so let's talk about having multiple instances of UI managed document on the same document. Am I allowed to alloc init file URL to create a UI managed document, and then somewhere else in my code, alloc init file URL, the same URL, and have two of them looking at the same document? You might think, oh, that can't work, but actually it does. It works perfectly fine. Okay? Works absolutely no problem. The two have their own managed object contexts that are different, but they're both contexts are looking at the same database, and when they both make changes, it's going to save. There is the possible problem, though, that one set of changes in this instance of the UI managed document, and this one might conflict. They might be one's trying to delete an object that another one is trying to set an attribute of at the same time. So if you do have this, it is possible to get conflicts, but usually if we have multiple instances, it's because we have one writer and many readers. It's pretty rare to have two separate controllers or something, each having a document and they're both making changes. That's pretty rare, okay? Especially both making changes at the same time. There's only so much screen for changes to be being made on. One thing to be careful of here is that if one document changes the database, the other one doesn't automatically see those changes, okay? It's not like, oh, I added an object in one managed document. Oh, I don't see it in the other one. Why don't you see it? Well, you don't see it because they have different contexts, different NS managed object contexts, but you're still modifying the same database. So how could you find out if you wanted to find out if another document was doing it? And the answer is the radio station. Okay? We could use NS notification. And so here's an example of having a controller, when it comes on screen, start listening to the managed object context there of a different document. Not the document it has open, but some other instance of an UI managed document. And it's looking for the radio station NS managed object context did save notification. So whenever that other document autosaves, then it's going to get an NS notification saying, oh, it changed. All right? And I'm going to call this method context changed or whatever. And what would I do when that happens? Well, two things. One, I could just refetch all my objects. Okay, I know the database has changed. I'll just refetch them all. We haven't talked about fetching, but I could refetch it and get a fresh set of everything. But actually, this context change did save notification gives you an array inside of its user info. There is a dictionary with 3 arrays that are a list of all the objects that changed. Okay, and you can merge those changes into your context using this NS managed object context method, merge changes from context did save notification. You just give it the notification, and it'll automatically merge all those changes into your context, which is pretty cool. This is a very cool method, very underappreciated coolness of this method, okay? So you're watching some other context that's on the same database as yours, but it's a different context. You get a notification, you can merge those changes into yours as if you had made those changes. And it's all going to be fine when both documents save because you're merging in the same changes